the hollow force. Luke Skywalker had always been driven by one thing: a belief in the Force, in its balance, and in the destiny it had shaped for him. From the desert sands of Tatooine to the stars above, he had embraced the call of the Jedi, fighting for peace and justice. His dream was noble: to restore balance to the galaxy, to rebuild the Jedi Order, and to pass on his wisdom to a new generation of peacekeepers. The weight of the galaxy rested on his shoulders, but Luke carried it with pride. After all, he was the last hope. But years of war had taken their toll: the battles against the Empire, the destruction, the loss. It all began to weigh heavy on him. As time went on, Luke found himself questioning everything he once held sacred. Was balance even possible? Could the galaxy ever truly be at peace? Or was the conflict he'd been born into destined to repeat endlessly? Alone, on Ahch-To, he sought solace in exile. The island was desolate, shrouded in mist and battered by the unrelenting wind. The ancient stone huts, remnants of an old Jedi temple, provided little comfort. Here, Luke hoped to find answers in the quiet, in the solitude. But all he found was silence. The Force, which had once been his constant companion, now felt distant, elusive. He sat by the cliffs, staring out at the endless sea, waiting for something, anything, to bring clarity. Days bled into weeks, and the Force remained silent. For the first time, Luke felt truly alone, not just in the physical sense, but in a way that gnawed at his soul. His connection to the galaxy, to the Force, felt hollow. One night, as the storm clouds rolled in, Luke awoke to a strange sensation. The Force was stirring, but it felt wrong, warped, twisted. He sat up in his small, dark hut, sweat beading on his forehead. His heart raced, but he couldn't explain why. The familiar presence he had once felt in the Force was now replaced with something cold, something dark. Luke grabbed his lightsaber, the weight of it unfamiliar in his hand. He hadn't held it in years, not since he had decided to abandon the ways of the Jedi. But now, a part of him felt like he needed it, like the galaxy had shifted in some fundamental, terrifying way. He stepped outside, the wind howling around him, the sky split with lightning. "Who's there?" he called into the darkness, his voice carried away by the wind. At first, there was nothing, just the howling gale and the crashing of waves against the rocks below. But then, out of the shadows, he saw it, a figure, faint at first, almost translucent. As it moved closer, the shape became clearer. It was a man, a Jedi, clad in robes as old as the Order itself. But something was wrong. His face was obscured by shadows, his presence heavy with malice. Luke's grip tightened on his lightsaber. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised its hand, and Luke felt a sudden pressure on his chest, a crushing weight that drove him to his knees. He tried to fight it, to push back with the Force, but it was no use. The power behind the attack was unlike anything he'd ever felt before. As he struggled, gasping for breath, the figure spoke, its voice cold and echoing. "You were never meant to bring balance, Luke Skywalker. You are a failure. The Force is not your ally, it is your curse." Luke's mind raced. What was this? A dark side apparition? A ghost of the past? No, it felt deeper than that. More personal. This wasn't just an external threat. It was something within him. A shadow of his own doubts. His own failures. "I destroyed the Emperor," Luke gasped, fighting against the invisible force crushing him. "I ended the Sith." The figure laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "And yet, here you are, alone, forgotten. The galaxy is still in chaos. The Jedi are gone. You are nothing." Luke's heart sank. The truth of the words stung more than the physical pain. He had tried so hard to rebuild, to teach, but every effort had crumbled. His students had either fallen or fled. The darkness had returned in the form of Kylo Ren, and with it, the hope of a new Jedi Order had been extinguished. He had failed, and now, it seemed, even the Force had abandoned him. The pressure increased, and Luke's vision began to blur. The island around him seemed to warp, the rocks and waves twisting into nightmarish shapes. The figure loomed over him, its face still obscured, but its presence was overwhelming. "You cannot escape this fate, Luke," it hissed. "The Force has chosen you. To suffer, to be forgotten." Luke's strength ebbed away, and he dropped his lightsaber, the hilt clattering against the stones. He felt cold, colder than he had ever felt, even in the deepest voids of space. The weight of the galaxy, the dream of restoring balance, had become his nightmare. The Force itself had turned against him, twisting his hopes into despair. With a final gasp, Luke collapsed, his body crumpling against the rocks. His last thought, as the darkness overtook him, was of his father. Anakin had fallen to the dark side, but at least he had found peace in the end. Luke, it seemed, was destined for something far worse, an eternity of isolation, of knowing that he had failed not only the galaxy but himself. The storm raged on, but Luke Skywalker was no longer aware of it. The once great Jedi, the hero of the rebellion, lay motionless, his dream of balance shattered. The Force was silent, and the galaxy moved on without him.